welcome to episode 41 of Mitolife Radio. Today I am speaking with Morley Robbins again. He's the founder of the Magnesium Advocacy Group and the founder of the Root Cause Protocol. I really like interviewing people about minerals because there aren't many of them out there that actually understand the importance, the foundational importance of minerals for human health. And Morley, I believe, is the world's expert on iron, copper, magnesium, and how those actually work together. He's also very, very knowledgeable about the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, as well as vitamin C, not being only ascorbic acid, but being a complex of different things and how that affects copper, and really fascinating information. So in this fourth interview with him, I actually focus on different conditions and get his take on it. So we talk about rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune conditions. We talk about, acne, and we talk about pregnancy and neurodegeneration, dementia, and how iron and actually iron dysregulation, iron overload, whatever you want to call it, copper deficiency, how that all plays a role in all of those conditions. So most health conditions have a mineral component to it. And that's why it always gets me when someone messages me and asks, Matt, what do you recommend I take for this? And a short answer, 90% of the time, could be beef liver, but it's not for everybody. So, I mean, there's always a context involved. But for most people, they have low magnesium, as seen in a magnesium RBC blood test, and they have low ceruloplasmin, or most likely everybody has low ceruloplasmin activity, which is harder to measure. So this is a really cool little interview and a little overview. I highly recommend, if you haven't listened to the first three with Morley Robbins, definitely do that, especially the first one, How Minerals Run the Show. That was my first talk with Morley Robbins, and I got rave reviews. People loved it. It really shifted a lot of people's paradigms thinking about health. Because if you're missing this piece, that acid rain increases iron actually being eroded from the earth, iron and aluminum. And guess what's a part of lipofuscin? Omega-3s oxidized, well, iron and aluminum. So if you're missing acid rain and you think PUFAs are essential fatty acids, then that's a recipe for every disease, because lipofuscin is like junk in the cell, and the cell can't generate energy. And when the cell can't generate energy, you have tissue death. And so the organ, the gland, cannot function as it should. So without further ado, here is Morley Robbins. Morley Robbins, round 4. Welcome back.
I can't believe this is number 4, but very excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. A lot of people have been sending me messages just saying how much they love. I think our first one was just a mind blower, where you were going into back in the 70s, where they switched the iron test, and How Minerals Run the Show is the name of that episode. And I recommend that's a place for people to start with health, because that whole iron anemia thing is just, it's such a deep programming. Like, all these women message me like, I'm anemic, I'm low in iron. I'm like, no, you're not low in iron. Like, please listen to that
Actually,
episode.
let's change that. Not low in iron, you're slow in iron. It's just very sluggish. That's what the problem is. Yeah, I have to remember that. I'll give you credit, but I'm gonna coin that one. I'm slow in iron. I like that.
I like that. Yeah, and really a big point that I keep hitting home is 99% is recycled, so we only need 1 milligram through the mouth. And so just for people to know, that little piece is so big. And I've been kind of looking, I browsed through your articles. You have a lot of great ones on gotmag.org. You have like over 40 iron posts. It's really great.
82 to be exact.
82, wow. That's awesome. Yeah, and there's different forms, but ferrous oxide and ferric oxide, those are both ways to say rust, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's pretty much what we were raised on, right?
different supplements in different forms. Yeah, exactly what it is. That's pretty
Jeez.
funny. There are actually
Yeah.
there's 9 different forms of iron being added to the U.S. food system. What people need to know is that all 9 have been classified carcinogens.
That's so wild.
Yeah,
Jeez.
and that I learned from the book Iron, the most toxic metal. So it's an amazing book by Jim Moon, spelled Jym Moon, PhD.
I'm going to check that out because I've only read Dumping Iron by Peter Morgan.
Oh yeah, that's a
That's
good
pretty
book.
basic though.
No, it's a pretty
Yeah.
good book. But Jim Moon's Iron, the Most Toxic Metal, that's sort of a graduate course. It's very readable, but it's got great references and a lot of good information in there.
Awesome. Does he talk about copper in there? Or?
No, that's the downside is, and I really was going to talk to him about that, but he passed away last April, which was very disheartening. So he was just a brilliant metal toxicologist, and his specialty was iron.
Wow. Yeah, just the more I study health, like we're going to be talking about a bunch of different health conditions today and from a mineral standpoint, how to tackle them. And I really look at it as cellular metabolism and getting energy to be produced in the cell. That's like, I mean, you have the root cause protocol. That's the root cause of just anti-aging, any health condition, right? It's just generating energy, and you can't do it with iron.
Right. No, I mean you can't get the most important element on the planet is oxygen. We can't live without it, right? So we can't live without oxygen, but we can't age without oxidants. And what's an oxidant? It's an accident with oxygen. And iron is a waiter. It carries the oxygen. It's very, very important. But copper is the chef. And it activates the oxygen and it deactivates the oxidants. So it works both sides of the angle. It's amazing.
And on that subject, I've been getting awesome feedback about my full Monty iron panel results, and I've convinced so many people to get that. I think it's an awesome just picture of what's going on with your health.
Yeah.
And you have a great article on how to read the test results. Do you kind of just point people to that, or do you think you need someone to kind of analyze the results? And
I think it really depends on what kind of questions people have. I think there's no question people can get good information from that test and get a real basic understanding of, am I in balance? I think where people really benefit from the conversation is there are about 12 markers in that test, and I can see all 12 at the same time, and the people that I train begin to have that same capacity. That's a really important skill set, is not to identify one marker and then go down to the second marker. You got to be able to look holistically at the whole picture. And I think that's where I'm not sure. I think the article is very helpful, but I'm not sure that they're going to be able to walk away with a total holistic view without the conversation. I think that really helps bring the whole analysis to life.
awesome. And do you charge to train people in that and just the mineral? Do you have like a little school?
Well, actually, I do have a training school. It's interesting. I train the public and practitioners who want to learn more about minerals. It's called the RCP Copernican Institute. And that's really, it's a 16-week program. But what you've just raised is this idea is maybe we do a mini video series, or maybe it's just one video, just to teach people how to interpret their blood work. And modest cost to learn that. That's a great idea. Thank you. I think I will crank that into the plans for the coming year, because I think a lot of people have that innate ability to analyze and want to know where am I relative to the norm.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Because when I read the test, I can kind of see, oh, there's a retinol deficiency, there's potential copper deficiency, and then obvious, like I had someone reach out to me that their iron saturation percentage was 53%.
Yep. That's sobering.
Some things are kind of plain in sight, but it's really more than just donating blood. You need more retinol and you need more beef liver, right? It's a little more complex than that.
Yeah, that I think that's the part that's a little different is um, people are used to looking at markers independent of each other, and they're looking at a kind of a mononutrient intervention.
Mhm.
That doesn't work. You got to have the full course, and the real interplay between those nutrients is what makes the difference.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to look into the Copernican Institute. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So, I
The next group is starting mid-January next year. Yeah,
perfect. Okay, I'll
yeah,
be adapted to the snow by then.
that's right. Yeah, you'll be looking for things to do in the wintertime, I'll tell you. Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah. Um, all right. Cool. Well, I guess we can just jump in. Then I have seven major conditions, and then
okay.
some random questions
Okay.
can jump into after. So, and I'm sure we'll offshoot. So feel free to rant and expand on different things
Yeah.
if you want. So, causes and treatment of rheumatoid arthritis. So
Okay.
that's a big one.
No, it is. It's huge.
Mhm.
So there may be over 100 different autoimmune conditions now. There's sort of been an explosion in the last 30 years, which should make people wonder why did that happen. But rheumatoid arthritis is one of those autoimmune conditions. So what does autoimmune mean? It means the body's attacking itself. So some of the leading minds have been studying this, and the three that have captured my imagination are Nancy Andrews, who is a world-renowned hematologist and the former dean of the medical school at Duke University, uh, Rebecca King, who's a world-renowned pathologist at Mayo Clinic, and then Marianne Wesling Resnick. It's a hyphenated last name. She's a world-renowned biologist and geneticist at Harvard's University School of Public Health. So these three women have been kind of working to rethink what is going on, and what they're converging on is there are cells in our body called macrophages, and those are the Pac-Men that gobble up the dead tissue or gobble up the pathogens or gobble up the dying red blood cells. And those macrophages fill up with iron. And when they fill up with iron, they lose their natural ability to do their work. Now, what I've learned since we last spoke, and this is blockbuster stuff, at least I think it is.
That's what I love about you. You always have something new. That's great.
Well, some people just say, "Oh, okay, that's new." It's like I think this is really important. So there, after the great oxygen event, 2.45 billion years ago, there was a series of enzymes that suddenly appeared on the planet called multi-copper oxidases. And what does that mean? Well, these enzymes can turn oxygen into water. Again, that's why we are able to exist on this planet. And one of those oxidases is inside our mitochondria. Thank you very much. That's why we live. So the
Is that ferroxidase?
ferroxidase is work in the back end where there's a problem, but it's cytochrome C oxidase. That's the front end. That's the front end. So again, oxidases are really important. And when you've got most people, when you're reading about the protein ceruloplasmin, that's a very important protein in our body, which we've talked about. It's enormous. It's 1,066 amino acids, has 8 coppers inside it. Nothing in the body comes close to that. But there are different forms of expression of that ceruloplasmin. And we have, there's the form it's secreted out of the liver, and that is called ceruloplasmin. Then there's a form that is on the membrane, and it's found on the membranes of macrophages and astrocytes. And astrocytes are the workhorses of the brain. The neurons get all the credit. The astrocytes do all the work. And that form of ceruloplasmin, it's called GPI ceruloplasmin. It's critical because it regulates iron along the membrane of the macrophages and the astrocytes. And then there's a third form. It's called cytosolic or cellular, intracellular ceruloplasmin. And guess where it's found? It's found in macrophages. Ding, ding, ding. And so the biggest concentration of macrophages in the body is in the liver. And about 80% of the macrophages in our body are found in our liver, and they're called Kupfer cells, spelled Kupffer, named after a famous German physician who found them, discovered them, and that's what the liver macrophages are called, Kupfer cells. Now, what you have to understand is that the organized medicine has a sense of humor, because when you translate the word Kupfer from German, it means copper. So what do we have? We have these macrophages that have a secreted form on the outside of the macrophage. They have a membrane-bound form on the outside, and they have cytosolic on the inside. So the macrophage runs on the energy of copper, and it's regulating iron. And so if you don't have bioavailable copper in your diet and in your environment and in your body, then the macrophage starts to fill up with iron, and the iron can't get out the back door called ferroportin, so it starts to get really obese with iron, and it loses its function. And then there's all manner of crises that happen, and rheumatoid arthritis is the inability to properly regulate the fluids in the joint. And when that rheumatic fluid, if I can call it that, gets oxidized, gets rusty, it's really painful. And it's, and again, but what's hard for people to really grasp, I think, is that exact same mechanism could be what's behind Raynaud's disease or Hashimoto's or diabetes. That's another autoimmune. Again, all of these autoimmune diseases all have the same point of origin. It's just different expression points in the body depending upon where we carry our energy.
Yeah, I think lupus, right? That's another one.
Lupus, absolutely. My sister has struggled with that for 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's the vitiligo, and I mean there's so many different forms of it, but again, all of these are expressions of the macro term is copper iron dysregulation. But when we get into the guts of it, it's the macrophages are iron laden, they're overloaded, and they are filled with what's called the labile iron pool, and the body can't process properly.
Wow, alarm bells were going off when you were talking about the astrocytes.
Yeah.
Because I sleep on the Magnetico. Dean Bonley made it. It's like a magnetic sleeping pad, kind of better than the Niken.
Yeah.
But he says that charges up the astrocytes because they convert chemical energy into electrical energy, right? And so in the brain, that's like super important for just recycling while we sleep, and just for, I mean, I was just thinking if that's in the astrocytes, then that's going to hamper our mental function, right?
Of course it will. All the neurodegeneration is iron accumulation. And again, the macrophages in the brain are called microglial cells. Most of the brain tissue is called glial. You got neurons, glial cells, and microglial. Well, they're like 5 different types of glial cells. And astrocytes is one, and oligodendrocytes is another. And one of the most, here's a fascinating feature that we may not have talked about. We're supposed to get the cholesterol that runs our brain from birth. We get a download of retinol from mom. That's where we're supposed to get our cholesterol. And that doesn't happen very often these days. So that,
Because of vegan diet or
yeah, a wide variety of reasons. And so 99% of the cholesterol in the brain must be recycled, because cholesterol has a very, very, very hard time crossing the blood-brain barrier. 1% of the cholesterol in the brain is from our diet, 99% from the recycling program. And let's go back to the astrocyte. That's where the recycling is taking place. Guess who's doing all the work? Copper. Thank you very much. And you probably have heard of multiple sclerosis. Well, multiple sclerosis is the inability to replace and repair the myelin sheath on the nerve ending, right? Right? And so what's the protective coating made out of? Cholesterol. Right. And if you can't recycle it. And so again, we're back to the same dynamic of low bioavailable copper, unable to recycle the cholesterol, and what's the enzyme that's actually making the myelin sheath? It's called lysyl oxidase. Thank you very much. Brings all our connective tissue together. It's like, Matthew, it's almost like this is a bad dream.
And we've talked about lipofuscin, and I'm sure that plays a role. That's in the lysosome, right? So it can't recycle.
Can't recycle. It absolutely can't recycle. And I was just talking to one of my clients. He's actually here in North Carolina. He's a fascinating guy. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to do that. But he went to the Naval Academy. He went to nuclear sub school, and then he went to medical school. This guy he's not your average chimp, right?
A juggernaut, yeah.
Yeah, juggernaut, and fascinating guy. And he was talking. He's a radiologist now, and he was telling me as he was leaving just a little while ago. He said the most fascinating MRIs are people with neurodegeneration. I said, why is that? He said, because they're perfectly black. Because the iron takes all of the energy. It's like a black hole. So the brain becomes a black hole.
Wow. Yeah, I was interviewed earlier today, and I explained PUFA, and thanks to you, the ALOX enzymes, I'm aware of that. Was it 5 or 6 of them?
Yeah.
They're oxygen sinks, right? They just they pull in oxygen.
And if they have access to ferroxidase, everything's cool. If they don't, everything's not cool. No, it's
wow.
I mean, see, the thing is, the more I learn about ceruloplasmin, the more I'm convinced it's the God particle. And this physician that I was just referring to, was just here a little while ago, he thinks it's a sentient entity, that it has intelligence. Wow. And I actually think he's right. He's a very spiritual guy beyond his science, and he's convinced that the ceruloplasmin and all of its functions is a clear indication of a thinking entity in our body, which does make perfect sense.
How many different expressions did you say it has, or is there a number on that?
Well, I've identified 24 enzyme functions, and then I started analyzing 3 of them pretty carefully. It turns out that they are methyltransferase enzymes. Well, there's 200 methyltransferase enzymes. So let's see. Do you think Mother Nature is going to do 3 with ceruloplasmin, and then the other 197 are going to be completely different? No. Again, see the challenge we've got is, I think it was Bruce Lipton said, we've got to stop thinking like Newton, particles hitting each other and force and all that stuff. And he said, we've got to start thinking like Einstein, energy fields. And what this whole copper-iron dynamic is all about is the energy field of someone who has proper balance with bioavailable copper and iron. It's a completely different energy field than someone who's got iron in the brain and it shows up black on an MRI, or it shows up black in their rheumatic tissue, or it shows up black on their heart or their liver or whatever. And that's the challenge, is we don't think energetically, and now we're being trained to think genetically. And what runs the genes? Epigenetics, the environment. And what runs epigenetics? Energetics. We're back to energy again. It's incredible.
That's great. Yeah, and that really well said. And the more I learn, like your work has really opened me up to a whole nother piece, because I was already obsessed with magnesium.
Yeah.
And I had some vague idea of iron, but I was completely out to lunch about copper. So just to kind of
most
combine
people are.
that story. Yeah.
No, and those are the two. Again, you go back to the very beginning of the show. What were you talking about? Energy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you make energy in the mitochondria? You got to have copper in complex 4. You got to have magnesium in complex 5. And if you don't have, and actually there's a magnesium in complex 4. It's a very little talked about form of magnesium, but it's coordinated with a very special kind of water, and it's only magnesium can do it. So it's just like there's some stuff going on in the mitochondria that we're not even aware of. But again, we're back to magnesium and copper as the minerals to bring energy to our being.
Were you referring to like easy water or the fourth phase, like Joel Pollack, kind of different? Yeah. That's a whole. I have his book, and it's just I need years to get through that.
Yeah, no, again, it's a completely different paradigm. Like what I just learned recently. Again, forgive me if I'm saying too much, but Columbia University has found out that the fight or flight response doesn't come from the adrenals; it comes from bone marrow. And
Wow.
when you understand what hypoxia is, it's not lack of oxygen; it's lack of usable oxygen. That makes so much more sense. And the thought that the skeletal tissue that has this energy field around it, then it starts to make more sense about why would we have that? Well, of course you got to have good skeletal matter to fight or flight. If you're going to run away, you better have good bone. And so it's I don't know, it's a mind-blowing change, and it's going to force the rewriting of all these textbooks, because the adrenals are important. I'm not in any way discounting it, but they don't start the process. It starts in the bone marrow.
That's fascinating you bring that up, because I used to follow a neurosurgeon, and he was talking about the bones being like semiconductors.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was based on the work of Becker or something, Dr. Becker.
I think that's right. Yeah.
They're like, they literally conduct electricity. So they're interconnected with the nervous system, right? It's kind of like directly plugged in. And
absolutely. Again, I think what's important is that people listening to this are getting a real good immersion about the importance of thinking energetically and stop thinking mechanistically and physically, which is what the system wants us to do. Oh, your XYZ is low, so let's pump it up. No, wait, why is it low? What's the energetic field that's causing it to be low? That's where we need to go with our analysis.
Yeah, well said. And I think the mineral relationships too, like I never knew until you that copper regulates iron, and just that little piece. It's like nobody knows that. Like 99% of people I talk to have no idea.
No idea.
That's the case.
No, the thing is one of my colleagues says, Dave Jernigan, he said, he was talking to his colleagues at a meeting that I was attending. He said, guys, the information's there. The research is there. They're just not teaching it. He said the research has been done. What Morley's talking about is absolutely proven in the literature. They're just not teaching it in doctor school.
Jeez. I guess to feed the system, right? It makes sense.
Yeah, right.
Just keep it going.
A game of finance and politics.
One thing I wanted to ask you too, before we move on from rheumatoid arthritis, is magnesium. Like my first thought when someone tells me that is, oh, calcification, and calcium isn't going to the right place because they're magnesium deficient. I guess that's another cause, right? Separate from all the.
So let's add to that model, because that's where I think where everyone starts out, is the very important relationship between calcium and magnesium. So calcium's supposed to be, for the most part, in our bone, and we need a little bit. Obviously, it resides outside the cell for the most part, but it's invited into the cell by magnesium to do work. And Andrea Rosenoff, who's a magnesium expert over in Hawaii, she has a wonderful 2-minute video for people to see how does the cell work with magnesium and calcium.
I'll post that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really cool video. And what's important to understand is that there's only one metal that causes calcium to leave the hard tissue, and there's only one metal that causes calcium to accumulate in the soft tissue. And that metal, of course, is iron. Iron activates a key enzyme called acid phosphatase. And acid phosphatase is what activates the osteoclasts to break down the bone matrix and release the calcium. So acid, and who's running the alkaline phosphatase, which is the other side of the fence, to build bone matrix? That's magnesium. So the highest affinity of any tissue in the human body, the highest affinity for iron is in the bone marrow. So if the bone marrow starts to accumulate too much iron, think that might affect the magnesium? You bet your bippy it does. And so iron causes this mechanism to start to wear down the calcium. Where does it go? It goes to the arteries. That's the soft tissue. And it'll show up. It'll show up on a hair test. But for those who are really curious about what is the origin of atherosclerosis, they need to read the article by Wang, 2012, and he walks you right through how iron is involved in every stage of atherosclerosis, including the planting of the calcium. It's incredible. And
is that plaquing, like plaquing of the arteries?
Absolutely, yeah. And so what's the flip side of that whole process? Is magnesium is getting jettisoned out of the endothelial tissue because of the change in energy. When iron shows up, it's an energy vampire. It just pulls the energy out of the tissue, and it shows up on the MRIs. It's black. There's no, the light can't get out. The energy can't get out. It's incredible. So I think the people need to understand that there's a sort of a Darth Vader in the background of this this calcium magnesium thing that no one ever talks about. And of course it's iron.
And it's in the Death Star. We can't see it.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. What was the name of the good ship? I always remember Death Star. What was the
Millennium Falcon, I think.
Okay. All right.
Han Solo's. Yeah, I grew up with Star Wars, so.
Okay.
And the one thing I wanted to ask you about is everyone's, alternative health community, fluoride. That makes the bones brittle, right? I mean, people drinking tap water, that just kind of adds fuel to the fire for the bones.
Although I don't think tap water is the biggest source of fluoride. I think it's a lot of dental procedures, and there's a lot of medications now that any medication that has the letter F as in Frank in it, ciprofloxacin, all the floxies, all the anesthesias. There are many classes of medications now that have the letter F in it. Means they're activated with fluoride, which means they're just pulling minerals out of our tissue.
It seems like a lot of the medications are just bad news.
I think they are. I mean, I would agree with you. I think what people don't realize is that when the body has optimal levels of bioavailable copper, it has the pharmacy right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's right. It's right in there inside.
Yeah, well said. So let's move on to the second one here. That was great. Hair loss, and it was specifically for middle-aged women, but we can kind of expand, I guess, male and female in general hair loss.
Well, hair loss it's a classic sign of stress, right? And when you dig into it, you find that what's really in play is hydrogen peroxide. And the hydrogen peroxide is very hard on the hair follicle. And it's also important to understand that the Chinese have been studying these types of things for a long time. And hair vitality is a function of kidney vitality. And so if I'm working with people who have a lot of hair issues, I'm beginning to worry about their kidney. And especially the people who've been taking a lot of vitamin D don't realize how damaging that is to their kidney function. And it's increasing calcium, which we were just talking about. And vitamin D is the antithesis of vitamin A. They're biological partners, but they're also biological antagonists. And so if vitamin A is instrumental in mobilizing iron, what do you think vitamin D is good at? Oh, storing iron. Yeah, how about that? And so nobody thinks about that. They don't think about the fact that maybe the fact that they're taking all that vitamin D because they think they're low because the range is completely artificial and skewed, that's affecting their potassium status. And that goes back to 1962, the work of Dr. Ferris at Yale Medical Center. I think it's a pretty good school, last time I checked. And so vitamin D supplements cause renal potassium wasting. That's the title of the study in 1962. And when potassium leaves the cell, guess who gets to get in there? Iron. Iron loves to come in a low potassium cell. What's it going to do? It's going to stir up hydrogen peroxide. And here's the part, here's one, there are only a couple issues that have really stumped me so far. What I know from clients and just from my reading is that when people increase their iron, when they take iron supplements, the hair loss stops. Now that makes no sense to me at all. I have not yet figured that out, Matt. But it's clearly counterintuitive because what they're striving to do is increase the amount of ferritin in the serum, which you and I know is a bad thing to do because that means there's more liver tissue that's dying, that's releasing the ferritin. But somehow in that process of increasing iron, it's restoring hair, and I cannot figure that out. But
maybe it's like chemo. It's like a temporary benefit, right?
well, maybe, but I know that what's causing the loss is the buildup of hydrogen peroxide, and catalase is the natural mechanism that we used to stop that hydrogen peroxide. Susie Cohen has a product called Catalase, so people who are worried about hair loss might look into that. And I would encourage people to do the protocol, but I think they might supplement with that catalase just to lower the incidence of hydrogen peroxide that's really aggravating the hair tissue.
Is it the liver that makes catalase, or
catalase is actually made? It's made all over the body, and it's principally found inside an organelle called the peroxisome, and that's where the fats get broken down. And you need that peroxide to break down the fats. But if a big surprise, what metal do we need to do that? It's called copper. And so it's got iron in it, but it must have copper in order to work.
I like what you said about the D supplements. I have a lot of friends that send me pictures like, hey, Matt, I'm taking this. What do you think? And D3K2, especially the liquid forms are really big right now.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so crazy because if people were just taking K2, there wouldn't be a problem. But they always put K2 with other things, right? Like D or zinc or something.
No, the thing is that people don't realize that the reason why the vitamin D is low is because magnesium is low. Why is magnesium low? Because iron is high. And why is the iron high? Because someone told them they were anemic. Why are they anemic? Because they've got slow iron. We're back to the beginning of the conversation.
I love it. Yeah, no, that was great. I interviewed a guy named Danny Roddy, and he wrote a book
Oh
called
yeah,
Hair Like a Fox.
yeah.
And it
Danny's a
seems
smart
like
guy. Danny's a very smart guy.
it's really smart. Yeah, it seems like the whole hair loss thing, people are still trying to figure it out. It's one of those kind of mysteries.
Again,
Like,
I think it goes back to the kidney. I I,
mhm.
I read that the Chinese have long linked um, scalp vitality to kidney vitality, and it's just,
Mhm.
again, it's I'm not sure there's been enough work done to connect the dots.
Yeah, that makes sense. I used to take an herb called Hoshu Wu, and
Okay.
I think it translates to like jet black hair or something
Oh,
like that. And I think it's like a black bean preparation. But the story goes some guy grew back all his hair in China or something when he was like 80 or 90.
well, here's a fun thing for people to do. Get some movies from the 30s and 40s, especially things like Danny Kaye movies or Fred Astaire movies, or where there's a lot of movement. And what you're going to see is people with copious amounts of hair and these little tiny waists, and they conform to what the human body's supposed to look like. And they have incredible energy, right? Unbelievable energy. Well, that was before they were adding iron to the food system, right?
Jeez.
So think about that. And now, how many shows are there where there's anyone moving? There are very few because people don't have the energy, and most people look like pears, and most people have thin hair, you know. And I'm aware of the fact that I've got thin hair, but I'm coming up on 67. Damn it, you know. I'm just happy to have hair, you know. My
Yeah, yeah.
grandfather, my mother's father, it's supposedly it's your mother's father that dictates. My mother's father was bald when he was 30 years old. So I think I'm doing damn good.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you are. And it's probably like we've talked about generational deficiencies, right?
Yeah,
Like
right.
retinol and copper intake of our
Huge.
grandparents and
Right.
great grandparents.
Yeah. Major changes. Major changes.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah, I'll do that with the movies. That's pretty cool.
Well, they're just fascinating to watch, especially like White Christmas. Get White Christmas, and it'll just blow your mind. The level of movement in that movie is unbelievable.
Yeah, since we last spoke, I was looking into World War One and how I think it was the American Red Cross. The women were going to the front lines World War One and feeding the soldiers donuts and canola oil. I think that's when it was introduced. And so
Oh
these
my
these
gosh,
fried donuts and vegetable
I
oil,
didn't know that. I
and
know that
serving coffee and donuts.
I know the Army has been methodically measuring atherosclerotic plaque in soldiers in cadavers from the First World War to the most recent conflicts, and it's
Wow.
getting worse and worse and worse. Well, it's like, come on, it's not a disease. It's a manifestation of the amount of iron that's bound up in that body.
It's too simple of an answer,
I
right?
know, I know, I know, I know. Call me crazy.
But it's not. It's complex, and you look into it. Yeah. Let's see. Number three, dementia and schizophrenia. So I guess we can lump in just neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's.
I think the most fascinating thing is that back in the 50s, late 40s and early 50s, they were using ceruloplasmin to cure schizophrenia.
Uh,
Yeah. Dr. Martens, Martens at Tulane, and some physicians at Harvard were doing this. And now it's like, poof, it's gone. So what is schizophrenia? It's adrenochrome. When adrenaline gets oxidized, it turns into adrenochrome, and it causes you to fritz out. I mean, and the reason why I know all this is my dad was manic depressive with schizophrenic tendencies, so I studied this. And what flipped me out was one of the articles that I was reading where they had 28 out of 30 people were cured of schizophrenia, cured one shot of ceruloplasmin, the very year that my dad left home because he flipped out. It's like, okay, life's unfair. So I think the issue with neurodegeneration, um, people don't realize, back to our earlier discussion, how much recycling is taking place in our tissue, especially in our brain tissue, and that there's this constant turnover of cellular events, and the both the neurons and the astrocytes need to be able to let go of their iron. And if they can't do that, it starts to build up, and it causes rust. This epidemic that we have with Alzheimer's, it is frightening how many people have it and how big it's going to get. And it's all from the fact that we have the brain stem, and we have the hippocampus sitting on top of the brain stem, and that's where the memory is stored, is in the hippocampus, right? Well, Carolyn Dean talks about it, that what is memory? It's like a little file drawer with magnesium opening and closing the file drawer. That's basically what memory is. And if you lose the magnesium, you can't open the file drawer, right? It gets stuck. So who's causing magnesium to leave the hippocampus? Iron, absolutely. And it's building in the hippocampus, and it's creating, what it really does is the true biochemical origin of Alzheimer's is the rusting of serotonin in the hippocampus. And it's because the iron can't be properly recycled. The amyloid amyloid precursor protein gets oxidized, and it becomes amyloid plaque. And all of these proteins, the amyloid precursor protein, the synuclein, Tau protein, the prion protein, there are at least 4 that are instrumental in managing the metals in the brain. Well, if they get oxidized, they don't work right.
Wow. So would you say for someone with, say, schizophrenia or Alzheimer's, magnesium would be a short-term help that would kind of get them back on their feet, but copper is kind of long-term, but ideally use them together? Or
yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think the magnesium and like coconut oil, there's a lot of evidence that those two alone can help people regain their memory. I don't think it's going to solve the really deeper problem, which is the iron accumulation. But when people begin to introduce the nutrients of the bioavailable copper and the retinol and the other factors that are in the protocol, then the body has the nutrients it needs to recycle itself, to rebuild itself, and to properly regulate itself. That's what's missing, is we've lost this primal capacity to regulate our metabolism. And the body will do what it can. The body's not demonic. The brain's not demonic. It's just it doesn't have it's like asking a carpenter to build a house but take away half its tools. Or have them be rusty. That's a more apt analogy. The carpenters are working with rusty tools, and they don't work right.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
So
yeah, and the burn rate's through the roof. So like people would have to probably do transdermal magnesium to even get up to the place to start to help the oxidative stress, right?
There's an article one of my students brought to my attention. It's entitled "Phlebotomy as a Cure for Alzheimer's."
Wow.
So start doing blood donations, and what that does is it forces the recycling of the iron in the body.
That's super cool. Okay, awesome. Let's see. Osteoporosis. I mean, that's pretty similar to arthritis, isn't it?
Well, osteoporosis would be the thinning of the bone matrix, which we were talking about earlier. And arthritis, it would be a cousin to rheumatoid arthritis. So you have rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. So what osteoarthritis is bone on bone, and very, very painful. Well, what's missing is the tissue in between, the cartilage, and the body's supposed to be able to rebuild itself and rebuild cartilage. And if the fluid, if the shock absorbers start to dry out because they get oxidized, well, then they don't work right.
that happened to me in junior high. I had to have a cast for, I think it was like 3 months or something,
Wow.
because that happened in right at my knee. It was the most painful thing. I couldn't put any pressure
Wow.
on that one leg. It was very painful.
That's amazing at that age.
Yeah.
And so when the body has access, see, they'll tell you, oh, it's chondroitin that does that. Well, chondroitin needs to have a battery. The battery is called copper. We're back to the enzymes. We're back to lysyl oxidase. We're back to
Mhm.
getting people to realize that the body has this incredible depth of capacity to rebuild itself and revitalize itself if it has the right tools and the right nutrients.
Yeah, animal foods, right? I mean, I'm trying to help the vegans as much as I can, and even like I tried vegetarian, I don't think it's enough. So,
Well,
yeah.
I think, there clearly are societies that have been vegetarian. I think
Mhm.
what's different is that their soil minerals were very different then than they are today. I think they had greater access to minerals that allowed them. I mean, if you can't get your copper from animal products, you'd have to get it from the soil. And
Mhm.
especially, and the part that's probably the most important is the retinol. And if you can't convert beta carotene into retinol, then you've got a world of hurt. And so I think that's where the modern vegetarian vegan diet is so misunderstood, is that the our organism, our mammalian metabolism requires retinol, real vitamin A, in order to properly empower copper, get it inside the ceruloplasmin, run the promoter regions of the genes.
Mhm.
The roles that retinol and the retinoids, which are the component parts, play is almost limitless. But
Mhm.
we're so preoccupied with vitamin D that we can't see retinol. We're so blinded by the vitamin D that we,
Yeah.
we don't realize that it's actually retinol that runs the body.
I got some raw A2 butter. I've been putting that on ground local grass-fed beef. It's just the best meal. It's like a
Oh, I
vitamin A
bet.
bomb.
Yeah, I bet. I'm sure your body's loving it.
Yeah, yeah. Gives me a lot of energy. So this is interesting. A lot of the questions, I think this is the last one in this theme. Degenerative disc disease. You kind of spoke on that a little bit, the fluid, right?
Well, again, you've got these cushions all over the body with bone on bone. if that disc or whatever the area is, if it starts to dehydrate, you know that it's being oxidized. It and oxidized is just a funky way of saying rusting, and so that process, if the tissue starts to lose its water, then it's not going in the right direction. So where does this water come from? It doesn't come from the glasses that we drink. People think, oh, I gotta have half my body weight in ounces of water. That's one of the great myths on the planet. And where's the water coming from? It's coming from inside the mitochondria. Because every time oxygen gets turned into one molecule of oxygen, O2, becomes two molecules of water. And to give people a sense of the speed, the complex 5, it's called ATP synthase, or it's also called the FOF1 synthase. But that is a rotor spinning at 9,000 revolutions per minute, and every time it turns one time, it's releasing 3 ATP. So when one molecule of oxygen becomes two molecules of water, it releases 3 ADP to go over to complex 5. So every minute we make 27,000 ATP. Now to put that into perspective, every heartbeat requires 1 billion ATP. So we got to make a lot of ATP, which means we got to make a lot of water. And if the discs aren't able to keep making water, if they start to slow down, or if the water becomes hydrogen peroxide does not have the same chemical properties as water. And suddenly that tissue starts to dry out and it becomes ineffective.
Wow. And you were mentioning magnesiums in complex 4, not as well known, but complex 5 especially, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
that's responsible, it's my understanding, for optimal hydration, right? That's like one of the major electrolytes.
Absolutely. I mean,
So,
magnesium is hydrophilic, loves water, and copper is lipophilic, loves fat. So,
awesome. That's cool. Yeah. And I want to add too, I use a back stretcher. Like they use them at, I think, chiropractors.
uh-huh.
It's called the Saunders Home Track. And I strap myself in with 3 straps on the top, 3 straps on the bottom. And I put it up to 40 PSI on an air compressor and it just pulls me. I love
Wow.
that thing.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with that particular procedure.
Combined with your information, I'll have a good back for my whole life.
Well, my wife's a chiropractor, so I'm spoiled.
That's awesome. Okay, pregnancy. So this is good to just talk about in general, and we've touched on this in previous shows, about how the firstborn takes 10% of the minerals, right, and then the secondborn takes 9% from mom.
Well, let's put it this way. Each child is taking 10%, but there's less and less to give. So the first child gets 10%, the second child gets 9%. And I'm using them like there's some precise number. The thing is, there's a steady decline. And so baby number 7 is like, oh, you've heard the run of the litter. Well, that's what that means. There's just not enough to go around.
Mhm.
And so a lot of couples wait to have children. They want to get their career started. And um, then that puts a lot of pressure on mom because she's trying to be mompreneur, trying to be both mom and business guru. And so there's a lot of stress when couples can't conceive, and that's fairly common these days. It's a lack of copper. Copper is added to the feed for animals so to make sure that they conceive. Farmers do that all the time. Um, but humans go to in vitro fertilization labs, which is very expensive, and I don't think it's more effective than just adding beef liver to the diet. But then we have the whole process of the world's authority at one point on magnesium was Mildred Seeley. She was a mom, in addition to being a physician and a magnesium expert, and she referred to pregnancy as a magnesium deficient state because it's constant stress, constant stress. It's a beautiful experience. It's lovely. Um, my mom had an expression that was pretty funny. She said, Morley, babies are easiest inside the womb. And she's right. Um, but now my kids are in the process of having children, so it's kind of fun to have that take place. But people don't realize that there's some very important downloads of nutrients in the pregnancy. In the second half of the pregnancy, there's this enormous explosion in the fetus's growth, um, and that doesn't happen by accident. You got to have the right diet. And for those who think that the prenatals that are being promoted are good for you, I'd ask you to think again, because they have too much calcium compared to the amount of magnesium they're giving. It's always twice as much. They're using way too much iron, too much zinc, using synthetic B vitamins. I mean, it's just and they dump a bunch of vitamin D in there, and then they give you synthetic vitamin A, which has no comparison or similarity to real vitamin A, which we were talking about earlier. So the prenatals are very sketchy. I'm very cautious about that. And probably where the biggest breakdown is in the last trimester is that the mom needs to download a lot of copper from the mom to the fetus's liver. So Matt and I have livers that have about 7 milligrams of copper in them. As adults, that's considered about average. It might be 8, and actually the brain has about the same amount, 7 or 8 milligrams of copper. Doesn't take much. It's a little whisper of copper, but it goes a long way. And
4 pennies, right?
4 pennies, right? And when we're born, we have 70 milligrams of copper in our liver. So tenfold increase. Well, one of the great myths on this planet is that babies are born perfect. No. Babies are born with whatever they can take. And if the mom doesn't have it to give, then that's when all sorts of problems arise. And if there's postpartum depression, you know that the mom didn't have enough copper to give up. The body just sucked it out of her. And so that's the source of the depression. And so if the baby doesn't get the download, if the way the mammalian metabolism works is if the body is low in copper, it will store iron. Where does it store iron? It stores iron in the liver. So then the liver, the baby, is born with an iron-laden liver. So that means that the enzyme, the 500 enzyme functions that are supposed to be there, aren't working right. And then what do? We start to shoot them full of chemicals. Here's something I just read this the other day. Someone posted this. It's a really cool picture.
I'm getting a little buzz, Morley, by the way. I don't know if. Okay, I think it's better now. I don't know. Maybe it's your new setup.
Yeah, really. I don't know whether you can see this, but it's a picture of a dad holding his newborn baby. And let me read you what it says. This is very important. After childbirth, there's about an hour-long neurological window of opportunity where the baby naturally makes direct eye contact with the parents. This eye contact triggers a massive release of oxytocin, the love bonding hormone, which the newborn requires for optimal mental health. Today, hospitals treat newborns with an antibiotic, eye wash, which keeps their eyes from opening, stopping any eye contact from being made. If the child goes without this eye contact after birth, their oxytocin receptors are significantly damaged. So we put eye wash on right away. We stick the baby with K2. We clamp the cord. As soon as the baby pops out, we clamp the cord. And what does that do?
Stop the flow of nutrients, right?
Stops the flow of nutrients. It's robbing the baby. There's actually 2 births. The baby comes out, and then about an hour later, the placenta comes out. And what's supposed to happen back in the day, before the modern era, before the advances of the modern era, the placenta downloads everything it's got, including the stem cells, who are supposed to go into the baby. And why does the hospital want to clamp the cord right away? So they can keep those stem cells because they're worth a fortune on the open market. So we just talked about 3 things that are happening, 3 things that we know about. Then let's take it one step farther. If the mom is not able to nurse the baby for whatever reason, what's supposed to happen is, in a normal childbirth and child rearing, there's supposed to be about 18 months of breastfeeding where there's a retinol download, and that retinol mixes with that bolus of copper to enable the child to have an immune system to fight infection. Now, if that doesn't happen, if the mom's not able to do that for, again, a wide variety of reasons, like in my case, my mom had an argument with her mom the day before I was born, and her milk dried up. So I wasn't breastfed. I'm still curious to know what that argument was about. But I hope it wasn't my name, because I think everyone should be called Morley. But if that doesn't happen, people go to infant formula.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether many of your listeners have checked infant formula, but there are two ingredients in there. Well, there are three actually that should not be there. It's always fluoridated water. I can assure you of that. Second, they add iron and they add vitamin D. And you can look up on a nutrient table the nutrient composition of breast milk, and there is 0 iron and there is 0 vitamin D. Why do you think that is? Because Mother Nature knows that iron and vitamin D should not be in the newborn. Mm-hmm. And what do pediatricians say? What does Mother Nature know? I know better, and we're going to pump this child full of iron and vitamin D. So those are just a few things that I know about the birthing process and the insanity of the conventional nutritional system.
That was really great. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that will help to wake some people up to the system, because it starts from birth. It's really, or before birth.
So here, just let's have some fun with the listeners. For those who are pregnant or who are thinking about getting pregnant, I want you to write down this name. It's Zyclopen, Zyklopen. It's a multi-copper oxidase that is very important in the placenta, and it regulates the movement of iron between mother and the baby. It's a big deal. Now, here's the fun part. Ask the doctor for your Zyclopen level and activity. And while you're at it, for grins and giggles, ask the doctor what your magnesium is inside your red blood cell. It's one of the most important markers for a pregnant woman, because if your magnesium is strong, you won't get eclampsia or preeclampsia. Preeclampsia is a clinical sign of oxidative stress caused by too much iron, which is forcing too much magnesium out of the tissue.
Wow, that's awesome. And as you were speaking earlier, I was thinking of Horizon milk, like in the red carton, and they add genetically modified algae oil, PUFA, and then there's synthetic vitamin A and synthetic D. So it's like fortified, organic
Ouch.
milk. And I'm sure a lot of pregnant women are drinking that, and so that's just accumulating in the liver of the child or the mother, right? Both.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've been so conditioned over the last 100 years to think about adding chemicals to the food because it's been done for 100 years, so it must be safe. Again, go back to the beginning of the conversation. 9 forms of iron being added to the food system that are carcinogenic. So it's just, we don't realize how dangerous the environment really is. And I don't mean to be a fear monger. I'm not trying to inject fear porn into the world. It's just people got to wake up and realize that they need to be much more discerning. They've got to ask better questions so they can get better answers. That's really what it comes down to.
I love that. Yeah, and we have the solutions. So that's the thing. If you know the problem. So last one here, we might have time for some random ones. Acne, and this is near to dear in my heart because I've dealt with this my whole life, probably from a retinol deficiency and vaccines or something, but skin conditions, right? I mean, it does go back to energy metabolism.
Well, energy metabolism, and it also goes back to retinol metabolism. And if you don't have proper levels of bioavailable copper and retinol, you're going to have skin issues. It's, again, what's the largest organ inside the body? The liver. What's the largest organ outside the body? Skin. And if the liver can't clear something, what does it do? It sends it to the skin. And why does the body do that? It's to get your attention. And so acne and cystic acne, clear signs of retinol dysregulation or lack of retinol. And some of the sickest clients I've ever worked with were ones that took Accutane for their acne. And the chemical property of Accutane is fascinating. it's a synthetic form of cis-13 retinoic acid, which is a very important retinoid, but it enables the loading of copper into a key enzyme called ATP7A. But what Accutane does is it accelerates the loading, sucks copper out of the tissue, and it's very, very damaging and destructive. And nobody's talking about it. And so, again, the acne issue, it's very common in puberty. And again, there's all sorts of hormone gyrations taking place. Well, if iron is too high, hormone regulation isn't going to be right. And if there wasn't retinol in the diet, you're going to have all sorts of skin issues. And it's really the liver that's suffering, but we treat the face. That's the insanity of the process.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I never went on an oral kind of, prescription thing, but I did apply different things. I can't remember the name. I think I did use a synthetic vitamin A topically,
Right.
but even that can have harm. Yeah.
Retin A. So the other thing that people can do, I've encouraged clients is to put cod liver oil on their face. Another thing you can do at night, I would do both of these at night. I don't think people want to be wearing cod liver oil in the office or anything, but put milk of magnesia on their face. It has a wonderful property to clear out the oils. I don't think it's correcting the problem in the liver, but it's certainly going to deal with the facial issue, which is what stresses people out the most.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've had me looking into the fat soluble vitamins more, and I've been into them since Weston A. Price, and A, D, E, and K. Those are all pretty much stored in the liver, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not just stored, but regulated in the liver. So,
awesome.
and when you start pumping your body full of vitamin D, you're going to restrict the absorption of vitamin A, and then you don't. And again, if you don't know what vitamin A does, you're not worried about it. If you do know what vitamin A does, it's an oh my god moment. So
awesome. All right. Let's see. I had a really good question from a friend. He asked sodium, aldosterone, calcium, parathyroid hormone relationship and how it controls electrolyte channels. I don't know if that's too big of a question.
No. I mean, okay. Again, the electrolytes are really important, obviously, because they provide electricity, right? So you have magnesium and potassium inside the cell, and calcium and sodium outside the cell. I think there's a lot of confusion about aldosterone and cortisol, that somehow they're regulating minerals. No, it doesn't work that way. They are a response mechanism when there's dysregulation that's taking place. And cortisol is trying to protect potassium status, and aldosterone is trying to protect sodium status. Where there's a lot of manipulation or change in those electrolytes is with the presence of I regard it as the key stress hormone, histamine, because it changes the electrolyte dynamics in an instant. And so you have magnesium and potassium rushing out of the cell, calcium and sodium rushing into the cell, and you have about a 50% energy loss inside the cell. So things change very quickly when histamine, it's the hormone of alert. So the aldosterone, it's an interesting question. I know that cortisol is responding to magnesium status, and I know that magnesium and sodium are instrumental in regulating the status of the adrenal glands. I don't know that I've ever thought about whether magnesium has an effect on aldosterone. It very likely has. But as it relates to parathyroid hormone, there are three calcitropic hormones. You have calcitonin, it's coming out of the thyroid, parathyroid hormone coming out of the parathyroid, and hormone D. And all three of those are regulating the level of calcium in the blood, making sure that it's available to keep, because we We can't live without calcium. We got it. The bulk of it obviously is in our bones, but we do need some in our blood because it's needed in tissue, and that's how it gets transported. And all three of those calcitropic hormones are regulated by magnesium status. So if magnesium's off, vitamin D's off,
Yeah.
calcitonin's off, parathyroid hormone's off. This is not my thinking. This is the pioneering and penetrating work of Robert K. Roode, who is an MD, PhD at USC Medical Center. Did a lot of breakthrough work in the 70s to 90s around this. So what people have to be really careful about is their desire to do a one and done Google search and not realize that that's all propaganda. Whatever you get on the first few hits on a Google search is what they want you to know. You got to go deeper, deeper, deeper to find the truth in the research literature, and look at the footnotes of the research literature to find out what inspired them. It's really funny. There's a funny saying that if you steal one sentence, it's called plagiarism. But if you steal 100 sentences, it's called research.
Research, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So you got to get into the research. You got to get into that's where the nuggets are. That's where the real truth is. But it takes time. It can be very confusing at times. There's been terms that I've ignored for years on end, and then when I find out what they really mean, I have to go back and reread literature. So it's a very demanding process to really learn the truth.
Acrolein.
Yeah, right. That's right. Is it acrolein or is it acrolein? I don't know how to pronounce.
That's tomato. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. No.
I've always said acrolein, but maybe it is acrolein. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it is acrolein. but the word labile, that threw me off for years. I thought that was a good thing. No, it's not a good thing. Labile iron pool, it's toxic. It's what sucks energy out of the mitochondria.
It's funny. I keep my finger on the pulse of like the keto community and the carnivore community, and I guess it's a trend right now. When people are feeling hungry, they'll just do some salt or something, like just take a pinch of salt and drink a little bit of water, or it's all about potassium. But I feel like the focus right now is on like sodium chloride and potassium, and nobody's talking about magnesium. So that's why I try
They need to talk about magnesium, and here's one that they made. This is a real. I just learned this day before yesterday. There's an enzyme that's never listed anywhere. It's called amino oxidase 3. Get my fingers. Amino oxidase 3. It's not important. It just regulates whether we're going to burn sugar or fat in the adipocyte. Wow, right? And if the copper's not there, the adipocytes don't work right. They store fat and they don't know how to burn it.
Wow. Do you know the study for that, or I'll look it
up? Matt, I'll send it to you. You can look at it. I just sent it out the other day. It's like fascinating. It's like, are you kidding me? Nobody talks about amino oxidase 3. No, have you ever heard anyone talk about endoplasmic reticulum oxidase? No. But if you don't manage the oxygen in the endoplasmic reticulum where all the folding is taking place, you're going to get oxidative stress, which is going to cause proteins to fritz out. And who's behind the endoplasmic reticulum oxidase? That's copper again.
Wow.
So it's just we have been so programmed to think a certain way, and the truth is over here. They want us thinking over here, and this is where the truth is.
I love it. This is a really, really good question. Is there any way to know how much of a certain mineral one should take? Does it vary by person? Any recommendations for daily intake? And
I think that's a great question, actually. The most important thing is never drink water. Let me back up. Only drink water when you're thirsty. Don't force it in your system. Don't buy into that. I gotta have so much water a day. But drink when you're thirsty. When you do drink water, make sure you've mineralized it. And there's a formula on all these different bottles about how to do that. The only one that I'm particularly prescriptive about is magnesium. The formula is 5 pounds, 5 pounds, 5 milligrams per pound body weight, or 10 um, milligrams per kilo. And with the copper, um, I would just be really mindful of your intake of bee pollen and the whole food vitamin C, and either the desiccated liver or the beef liver once a week. And you're going to get what you need. What they claim you need is 2 milligrams of copper a day. What really healthy people eat is about 6 to 10 milligrams of copper a day. And that takes a lot of doing to get 8 or 9 milligrams of copper, but that's what the body really wants. And the other mineral that I think is particularly important that you just alluded to, Matt, is the potassium. A lot of people who were dancing with vitamin D lost a lot of potassium, didn't realize it, and if you have any kind of histamine issues, you need to be mindful of potassium. The amount that we need on a daily basis is like 4,500 milligrams a day, which is an enormous amount. But some people would do well to add like 400 or 500 milligrams a day just to support the overall diet that they're taking. I've got some colleagues and clients that will take a pinch of potassium chloride, or potassium bicarbonate, or maybe cream of tartar. And when they feel like a migraine coming on, they'll pop a little pinch of potassium, boom, the migraine's gone.
Wow.
So these minerals are very powerful. They're very effective. But those are the only caveats that I'm aware of. I think just in general, you need to be eating organic food that tends to be more mineral rich. Make sure your water is mineralized, and just be sensitive to the need for magnesium, copper, and you might need the extra potassium.
I love it. And I don't think I've ever asked you about iodine. I used to put Lugol's on, and now I'm like, that's way too much, because people were getting up into the hundreds of micrograms of iodine to like detox heavy metals and stuff.
One of my rules of thumb is if an allopathic physician is recommending it, step back and think about it.
Mhm.
And so I'm not a Luddite. I know how important iodine is, but I think it was being pushed in the absence of ferrooxidase. If those iodine can oxidize iron the same way that ferrooxidase oxidizes iron, and the difference is that iodine doesn't give off water, ferrooxidase does. So that's a big difference. Again, that's Mother Nature at her finest. And I think I would be mindful of your seafood intake if you want to have
Oysters.
oysters, certainly, but also seaweed, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly do that, but you've got to be really careful about where the water is that came from. But I don't think you need to be worried about, is my thyroid got enough iodine to. I don't think we have that level of shortage. But I think what we do have is a gross mismanagement between the copper and the iron that no one talks about. And again, all of the optics are on calcium, iron, vitamin D, zinc, iodine. I mean, really, come on. And nobody talks about magnesium. Nobody talks about copper. Nobody talks about retinol. Good heavens. So I think
I had
that.
a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, someone asked zinc and NAD to rid the body of copper overload. I'd say listen to all of my Morley interviews.
Yeah. There is no copper overload. What happens is when ceruloplasmin gets breached by insulin, sugar, hydrogen peroxide, and ascorbic acid, citric acid. There are many chemicals in our food system that are designed to blow ceruloplasmin apart. The copper leaks out, and then you have what's called unbound copper. And what I've learned is that there is no unbound copper. It gets bound to some other protein. but it can't get back into ceruloplasmin if there's all of this ascorbic acid and citric acid and iron. It just doesn't get recycled the way it's supposed to.
And citrate is another one, right? Because I've found citrate in so many supplements. Like there's magnesium citrate, but there's also all sorts of other minerals bound to it. And was it one study or there's more showing that inhibits the liver's ability to make ceruloplasmin? Or
One that I know of, there may be others. I know that it was identified. Citric acid was classified as the natural inhibitor of ceruloplasmin in the blood.
Wow.
That should catch everyone's attention. But see, if you don't know what ceruloplasmin is, if you've never heard that term, if you don't know what copper is, and just think of it as being a toxin, well, then you want to, I want to get rid of that. And that's where I think that's where the system has this over the barrel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Hair mineral analysis. You used to use that, right? Or
well, I still do, but I don't diagnose from HTMA. I don't diagnose from a blood test either. I use them as educational tools, not as diagnostic tools or prescriptive tools.
Okay, awesome.
Very different.
Yeah. The hair is just a snapshot, right? I mean, depending on how fast it's growing, and
yeah, it's like a core sample in the earth, and so for every inch, I think it's about 3 months of activity. But again, it's a lot of people get into what I call whack-a-mole nutrition, and if something's low, I've got to pump it up. If something's high, I've got to whack it down, and that what the pattern tells you is if there isn't a proper balance between the minerals, well, then you know the person's under stress. And based on my readings of the tea leaves and all these literature reviews and stuff, when the body's under stress, there's one reason. It's got too much oxidative stress. And the oxidative stress stems from a lack of bioavailable copper and too much iron.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. I think this was awesome. We covered a lot of new territory that we haven't before, and just connecting the dots for people, because I think looking at these conditions from a mineral standpoint really simplifies it, because it's not what supplement do I take, what herb do I take, what protocol do I do. It's just balance. It's a holistic, balancing the whole body kind of perspective.
That's awesome. No, I think it's great, and I appreciate the chance to have these conversations. We can certainly continue this from time to time, as I'm always coming up with new information, so you know that. But I'm sure there will always be questions, so we can continue this kind of exchange. Would be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like all the research is out there. It takes people like you to connect the dots, and kind of just, like you said, you have to look at the footnotes, and then you have to just keep digging and digging. So,
well, and what's important about these conversations is that people can access an understanding that they might not have gleaned from reading the literature. I think that's why these conversations are so powerful.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thanks, Morley. Hang on, and we're going to close out the show.
That sounds great. Okay, thanks so much.
All right, that wraps up today's show. Always fascinating with Morley. I thought the part about phlebotomy being used as a cure for Alzheimer's disease was fascinating. Any kind of neurodegeneration, usually there's a iron component, an iron toxicity component. I also thought the part about pregnancy being a magnesium deficient state, which was interesting that Mildred Seelig said. So that actually is why I drink magnesium bicarbonate water, because we naturally weren't getting large amounts of magnesium in our food. And I think that's the big misconception with people. They think that we're designed to get all of our magnesium from the food that we eat. Well, most of us know that the soil is already depleted, but even less of us know that most of our magnesium intake naturally came via our drinking water. And so that's why I'm a huge fan of the Pristine Hydro drinking water filter, is because it has mostly magnesium bicarbonate with trace amounts of calcium sodium, and potassium bicarbonate. And these were naturally in our drinking water prior to the Industrial Revolution, but we're not getting them anymore. So just by drinking this magnesium bicarbonate rich acid-free water, you can really help with a lot of these conditions that Morley talked about. And I really think the full Monty iron panel is still a good place to start. If you're confused, you feel like you plateaued with your health, you don't know what to do next. I used to be confused about tests. What do I test? My testosterone, my thyroid, adrenals. There's so many different things you can test, right? I think the most important thing to get tested is iron. And the cool thing about his test, it also shows magnesium, zinc, and copper as ceruloplasmin, which is really cool, which tells you a lot about your health. And no matter what health condition you're dealing with, usually it's an energy deficiency, so not generating enough ATP, from a mineral dysregulation foundation. So your minerals are off. Most people have way too much iron, not enough K2, not enough vitamin E, not enough magnesium, and not enough copper. And sometimes too much of iodine or different supplements that they're taking, usually calcium supplements, because calcium antagonizes magnesium. So I would make this a lot longer, but I'm actually in the process of moving. So I'll just give a quick shout out to my Shilajit product from Mitolife called Panacea. That's the ultimate mineral balancer because it contains fulvic acid in a naturally occurring amount. It's not a jacked up super high percentage like a lot of these Shilajit companies can do. This one's 7.65%, and that's great. That's what you want. And it's very affordable. I personally take about 3 to 4 to sometimes 5 grams a day, but you don't have to do that. I would say the minimum effective dose would be 300 milligrams. And ideally, if you're a man, especially get up to 500 for the testosterone boosting effects. So that's only 3 tablets, and it's $40, and a container contains 150 tablets. So it's very affordable for what it does. And I'll be posting more studies on my Facebook and Instagram about it. But Shilajit is a whole food supplement, and I think it's way overlooked. People really look down on supplements, and I think a lot of them, you're playing with fire, you're playing, with chemistry and the element game. But with Shilajit, it's actually Mother Nature designed it perfectly. It's all balanced. And so it actually helps to balance all the minerals in your body. It's a full trace mineral source. There's magnesium in there, selenium, zinc, copper, vanadium, every mineral you can think of, 84 plus, known and unknown, with fulvic acid, which is a really complex substance that makes minerals organic so your body can actually utilize them to perform all of its functions. And remember that vitamins, minerals, enzymes, they all work together. And so usually people are missing the mineral piece. And if you're missing the mineral piece, you could be slamming vitamins, slamming enzymes, and it's probably not as effective. So I like taking a combination of enzymes and minerals in the form of Shilajit. And I really don't try to get my minerals from plants. That's a really big thing that I'm counter to in the alternative health field. I try to get most of my minerals from Shilajit, raw dairy, so raw milk, cheese, aged cheese, raw goat milk, eggs, and just animal foods. Grass-fed beef, bison, I really love, red meat. But I think people going to plants for the minerals is really Russian roulette with health because you don't know what minerals those were grown with. It's not that they're not in the food. It's that they're the wrong, poisonous, deadly, retardation-causing minerals in the produce. That's the problem, especially when you run it through like a Green Star concentrator. Now you're concentrating that poison and drinking a concentrated poison. So I'm not a fan of green juice at all. I'm not a fan of green juice powders at all. I used to be. I'll never endorse those unless I'm producing them myself. But most food we consume is not grown in a greenhouse. It's not grown protected from acid rain with filtered water and actually given the minerals that it needs. And it's way more complex than that. A lot of people have a lot of hubris, I guess you could say, about growing food. Like, I know how to grow food. It's way more complicated than we know, and things have been very altered. It's not like you can just go ancestral and go primal and go live in the jungle or the forest and be healthy. You're going to be breathing glyphosate. You're going to be breathing chemtrails. You're going to be breathing acid rain, and the acid rain's going into your spring water that is then eroding your cells and rusting you from the inside out and complexing with the omega-3s you're consuming and creating lipofuscin. So we're in a complex situation. It really depends how far you want to go with this. I personally want to take it as far as I can because I'm interested in longevity, and I like spending time with my mother, my dad, my brother. And I think that the coolest thing about longevity is you could spend more time with loved ones. So I think that piece is often not in the conversation. If you have more time with loved ones, that's pretty priceless. And so maybe we should pay more attention to minerals, pay more attention to our drinking water, and maybe intelligently supplement with specific things. If you have fibrosis, systemic enzymes from Mitolife might be awesome. If you have stress, digestive enzymes to help with the 50% enzyme loss that your pancreas isn't making because it's bicarbonate deficient and it's omega-3 poisoned, those might help. Or Shilajit, 3 tablets a day, or vitamin E. These aren't recommendations. I mean, these are recommendations I give to my close friends, and I take different doses. But with the vitamin E, that varies. Usually 400 IUs is enough for the average person. But if you're interested in detoxifying PUFA and lipofuscin, and there's some research to show that if you're not over the hump, you're not over 50 or so, or half of your lifespan, which, you can always increase that. But vitamin E actually has a better effect. That is to say, the first half of a life, the vitamin E actually has a deeper, more powerful effect at actually clearing the already there ceroid pigment / lipofuscin granule accumulation, age pigment, in the heart, the liver, the everywhere, kidneys, the brain, tissues, the muscles. And this causes tissue atrophy, just like calcification does. That's not talked about. It's the unspoken plague, lipofuscin. And so Morley knows about it. He's studied it a little bit, and he knows that iron is a big part of that. And so get your iron tested. Look into Morley Robbins' work. Listen to my first interview with him and start to take this iron piece more seriously. And by the way, know that Shilajit actually helps with iron, quote unquote anemia. No person on this planet is anemic. That's physiologically impossible. But it helps with the excess, unbound, inorganic iron in the system, because fulvic acid will chelate and complex all monovalent and divalent atoms, meaning inorganic iron, which is priceless. So my personal strategy for iron poisoning is number 1, Shilajit, number 2, donating blood, minimum twice a year, ideally once a quarter. And so he has a whole protocol on his website that you can check out. That's at gotmag.org and the rootcauseprotocol.com. And then my websites are matt-blackburn.com and mitolife.co. So that first one is my recommended products. And then Mitolife, I just released a really cool vitamin E, which if you're an athlete, it's something I haven't talked about. Think about vitamin E for athletic performance, because it really does help to increase oxygen utilization. Because PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-3s, DHA, they starve the cells. And so they strangle the cells. So no oxygen can get in. No oxygen, electrons can't move across the chain, can't make ATP. So you add vitamin E to the mix, and it actually helps protect the cell completely from lipid peroxidation and all the effects of estrogen, which again suffocate the cell. So really cool. You can use it as a preventative measure if you're going out to eat. You can use it as a detox measure if you are aware of lipofuscin and you want to clear that out of the cells. Or you could just use it if you know that there's not enough vitamin E in the food that you're eating because you cook your beef and that destroys the vitamin E with heat. And your nuts and seeds have inhibitors, which like the PUFAs, which actually prevent vitamin E from being absorbed. So you're only getting at best 5 to 10 IUs of vitamin E a day. Let's bump that up to 400 and see what happens. Again, I personally take 3,000 on average, and I feel great from it because I have A coming in, I have vitamin D, and I have vitamin K. So I don't have to worry about imbalancing my minerals. I eat unlimited red meat, unlimited butter, cream, and milk. So I'm definitely good on retinol. Today's quote is by Carolus Linnaeus. Natural bodies are divided into 3 kingdoms of nature: the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms. Minerals grow, plants grow and live, animals grow, live, and have feeling.